When we moved into this house 3 years ago, it was meant to be a fresh start. A quiet life in the suburbs with my husband, Brandon. Just the two of us. No kids yet, and no pressure. We both wanted to enjoy this stage of our marriage before making any big changes. The house wasn't new, but it had charm. A wraparound porch, a small fenced yard, a garden patch that got good sunlight. We got it through one of my connections, at a deal too good to pass up. I handled most of the arrangements, paperwork, payments, the ongoing bills, and Brandon never asked many questions. For a while, it really did feel like a dream. But then came the visits. His parents, Cheryl and Walter, lived in an aging condo in the city. They started dropping by. At first, it was just Sundays, then Thursdays. Then suddenly they were showing up unannounced on Tuesday afternoons, letting themselves in with the spare key Brandon had given them, just in case. "Oh, this place is just so cozy," Cheryl would say every single time with that saccharine smile. "You're so lucky to have this much space." "You could grow tomatoes here," Walter added once, eyeing the patch of soil where I'd planted herbs. Brandon laughed. "Why don't you two just move in already?" I turned and stared at him. He raised his hands, grinning nervously. "Kidding." Obviously, but I knew that look. That wasn't a joke. That was him testing the water. Before we got married, I made one thing absolutely clear. I would never, ever live with his parents. It wasn't a casual request. It was a boundary. A deal breaker. I grew up watching my mom get torn apart by my grandma day after day while my dad just stood by. She eventually left him when I was 12, taking me with her. My brother stayed behind. No one tried to stop it. I knew, even back then, I would never put myself in the same position. And Brandon knew it too. I reminded him of that boundary early in our relationship. My parents divorced because my dad never stood up for my mom, I told him. I can't live in a house with your parents. Ever. "I get it," Brandon had said back then. "Totally. I'm the second son anyway. My brother will take care of them. Don't worry." For a while I didn't, but slowly things began shifting. One day Cheryl showed up with an entire sea bass, a whole fish. "It was on sale." "I figured you could fillet it. You're such a good cook." I'd never touched a whole fish in my life. I had no idea what to do with it. I ended up Googling a tutorial and hacking my way through it, but the result didn't meet her unspoken standards. "Well," she said with a sigh, "it's definitely not restaurant quality, but it's edible." The next week, Walter began planting squash in my garden beds, without asking. I had basil, rosemary, cherry tomatoes, all now uprooted to make space for 4 massive squash vines that swallowed the whole patch. "Don't worry, we're doing you a favor," he said, brushing dirt from his gloves. "This soil's good." Brandon didn't say a word. Things escalated. Food started disappearing from the fridge. Whole packs of chicken gone. My yogurt, my leftovers, vanished. I asked Brandon if he was snacking more. "Oh no, I think my parents might have helped themselves. I gave them the key in case of emergencies." "Emergencies?" I confronted Cheryl politely one evening. "Hey, could you let me know when you take something from the fridge? I sometimes plan dinner in advance." She pursed her lips. "Well, maybe you should label it then. I'm not a mind reader," Brandon, of course, jumped in. "Aurora, don't be petty. It's just food." Something cracked in me then. A familiar bitterness I hadn't tasted in years. That night I lay awake, staring at the ceiling fan. Was this how it started for my mom? One boundary pushed, then another, then silence, then survival. The next morning, I asked Brandon calmly, "Are your parents planning to move in?" He blinked too fast. "What? No. Why would you even think that?" I just stared. He shrugged. "Even if they did, what's the big deal? It's not like we don't have the space. You promised me." Brandon rolled his eyes. "Things change, Aurora." Life changes. I didn't like that answer. It wasn't just the words. It was his tone. Casual. Like the promise never mattered. I needed clarity, and I knew who would give it to me. I reached out to Rachel, Brandon's sister-in-law. She was married to his older brother, Jared. Rachel was quiet, gentle, never confrontational, but I always got the sense she noticed more than she let on. I called her that afternoon. "Hey," I said, "this is a little weird, but have Cheryl and Walter said anything about moving?" A long pause. Then Rachel exhaled. "You don't know?" My stomach sank. "They didn't tell you about the building?" What building? Their condo's being torn down, foundation issues. Everyone's been notified. Construction starts in 2 months. I nearly dropped the phone. They've been trying to figure out where to stay. Jared and I offered to help with the rental, but they refused. Walter said Brandon already agreed to take them in. I didn't speak. And there's more, Rachel added quietly. When we found out how expensive the relocation would be, Jared said they could put the condo in his name and we'd pay the repair fees. Brandon lost it. Said the deed should stay with their dad. Said it's his right as a son. I sat down. So he's fighting for inheritance? By housing them? Rachel hesitated. I shouldn't be telling you this, but yeah. He made it clear. He wants to be the one to care for them, so he gets what's left when they pass. What's left? I whispered. There's nothing. The condo's underwater, and Walter's still paying off debt from the renovation. Brandon had known this all along. The visits weren't casual. The fish, the gardening, the fridge raids, they weren't temporary. They were a slow move-in, planned, precise. Behind my back, I thanked Rachel, hung up. Then I stood in our kitchen, staring at the garden, at the overgrown vines, at the space they had claimed as theirs, and I smiled. Not because I was okay, because I knew exactly what I was going to do next. I stopped fighting, stopped nagging about the fridge, stopped moving Walter's tools off my counter. Instead, I said, no problem, and quietly began putting my own plan into motion. If they were going to stage a slow invasion, I would stage something bigger. Boxes began to appear in the guest room. Just a few things for storage, Cheryl said with a breezy laugh. Walter carried in a full-length mirror, then a recliner, then a second mattress. Soon, my linen closet was full of her towels, and my spice rack was crowded with her jars. My garden was gone under a blanket of vines. Brandon didn't even blink. He'd been helping them carry boxes. At night, I would lie awake and remember my mother's face, how small she looked in my grandmother's kitchen. I had sworn never to become her. Now here I was, replaying her story. Except I had an exit. I made an appointment with a realtor, quietly, off-site, during lunch breaks. We met twice, walking through comparable houses in the area. She explained how a discreet listing could work, how buyers could be lined up without a public sign. I nodded, taking notes. Move fast, I told her. I want it done before anyone here notices. While Brandon and his parents nested deeper, I was filling out forms and scanning documents. The sale was almost ready to close. I just needed the right moment to draw a line. It came over dinner one rainy Wednesday. Walter had commandeered my grill again, Cheryl had made a lumpy casserole, and Brandon was acting like a gracious host in his own little kingdom. We're so comfortable here, Cheryl cooed. Aurora, you've been such a blessing. Walter grinned. Feels like home already. Brandon leaned back in his chair. You guys should just stay. Seriously. No more back and forth. This is your home now. He turned to me with a smirk. Right, babe? I set my fork down and looked each of them in the eye. Sure, I said calmly. That works perfectly for me. Because tonight is my last night here. The room went still. 3 faces stared at me. What? Brandon barked. I stood, walked to the hallway, and returned with my suitcase. I placed it by the door and handed him an envelope. Divorce papers. You promised me we'd never live with your parents, I said evenly. You broke that promise the second you let them move in without asking. Cheryl shot up from her chair. You're going to throw away your marriage over a few boxes? This isn't about boxes, I said. It's about trust. Brandon's jaw clenched. You're insane. We're not actually getting divorced. Sign the papers, I said. I already have. He looked at his parents. Walter's face was pale. Cheryl's eyes burned. You'll regret this, she hissed. Maybe, I said. I'll be back on Saturday to collect the rest of my things. I reached for the door, then paused and looked back at all 3 of them. You might want to start packing too. Cheryl frowned. Excuse me? You'll see. Then I left. For the past few nights, I had been walking through the house in silence, taking stock of everything they had taken over. The framed photos on the shelves weren't mine. The smell in the kitchen wasn't my cooking. Even the living room cushions had been replaced. Cheryl said mine were too neutral and swapped them out for ones with gaudy red paisley. Walter had put up a calendar with golf jokes. I hadn't laughed once. I spent Thursday night going through old receipts, closing out subscriptions, organizing every document. It was oddly therapeutic. Every drawer I cleared felt like peeling away another layer of a marriage I no longer recognized. This wasn't grief. It was relief. Slow and steady. On Friday, I boxed up the last of my personal items. Photo albums, my grandfather's watch, a few letters from my mom. The rest, I didn't care about anymore. Let them keep the curtains and the mugs and the couch they thought they owned. They hadn't just taken up space, they had tried to erase me from it. But I was about to remind them who this house actually belonged to. As I stepped out of the car on Saturday, the sky was overcast. A quiet, still gray that made everything feel heavier. But I felt light, calm, ready. This time, I wasn't walking into an ambush. I was walking in with a mirror, and they were about to see themselves clearly. The moving truck pulled up right on time. I stepped out in jeans and a clean button-down, hair tied back. No drama, just business. I climbed the porch steps. Brandon opened the door before I knocked, arms crossed like a bouncer. His face looked more tired than angry now. "You're really doing this?" he said, tone low and bitter. "You're actually moving out?" I didn't answer. I glanced inside. Cheryl's doilies on every surface, Walter's recliner by the fireplace, their clutter soaking into every inch. "You didn't pack," I said flatly. "Why would I?" Brandon snapped. "You're the one leaving." Cheryl appeared behind him with her arms folded. Walter stood in the hall with a smug half-smile, holding a mug I didn't recognize. "This is still our house," Brandon barked. "You don't get to just show up and pretend you're in charge." "You left?" I stared back at him. Behind me, I heard the crunch of tires on the gravel driveway. Footsteps on the path. Brandon frowned. "Who's that?" I turned, stepped aside. A woman in a navy blazer carrying a clipboard walked up the steps beside me. "Hi, I'm Jenna from Bayview Realty," she said brightly. "Aurora, thanks for meeting me here. Ready for the walkthrough?" I smiled and looked past her into the house. "Let's get started." Jenna stepped through the doorway like she'd done it 100 times. Professional, cheerful, oblivious to the minefield she was walking into. Brandon didn't move. "Walkthrough?" "What the hell is going on?" Cheryl narrowed her eyes. "Aurora, what is this?" Walter stared at Jenna's clipboard like it might bite him. Jenna smiled politely at the three of them. "We're just here to evaluate the property before the final handoff. No need to worry. It'll only take a few minutes. Handoff?" Brandon's voice cracked. "You're kidding, right?" I stepped past him and into the house. "I sold it," I said simply. "You... what?" Cheryl gasped. Brandon's face contorted. "You're bluffing." Jenna flipped through her folder. "Sale finalized Wednesday. Buyer takes possession next week. We'll be scheduling the moving deadline for the current residents shortly." Cheryl stepped back like she'd been slapped. "You can't do this. This is our home." "No, Cheryl," I said, turning to face her. "It was never your home." It wasn't Brandon's either. I bought this house before we got married. It was mine, and now it belongs to someone else. Brandon's voice lowered, desperate. "Wait. You said we were renting it through a friend, that it was under a good deal." "That was the version I gave you," I said evenly. "The truth? I used money from my late father's inheritance. I just didn't want that to be part of our marriage. I didn't think I had to put up a banner reading, 'Mine, not yours.' I expected respect instead." Cheryl was fuming. "You had that kind of money? At your age? There's no way I did," I replied coldly. "And I spent it on a future that clearly didn't include you three treating me like a doormat." Walter finally spoke, slow and stunned. "So, you're really selling the house out from under us?" "I already did," I said. "You're trespassers now. Or, more accurately, guests with an eviction notice." Brandon turned red. "You seriously think you can just waltz in here with some paperwork and throw us out?" Jenna looked up. "Actually, yes. Legally, it's all here. I'll give you until Thursday to vacate. After that, it becomes a legal matter." Cheryl let out a bitter laugh. "We just bought new furniture for this place. We financed the dining table. We have nowhere else to go." "That's not my problem," I said. "It never was." Brandon stepped forward. "We're still married. You can't just..." I held up my hand. "No, you signed the divorce papers, remember? You shouted you'd gladly divorce me in front of your parents, so now you're no longer my husband. Just a guy who scammed his way into someone else's house and lost." His eyes dropped. He didn't deny it. "Please," Cheryl said, her voice cracking. "Can't we just stay a little longer? At least until we find something?" I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw a woman who had never seen me as an equal, only as a utility. Someone who cooked, cleaned, stayed quiet, and knew her place. "No," I said. By Monday, the moving truck was back, but this time for them. They tried to fight it. Cheryl cried to Jenna, tried to stall the buyers, but the new owners had already booked renovations. Walter quietly boxed up his golf magazines. Brandon didn't say a word to me. I stood on the sidewalk, arms folded, watching as their final load rolled away. Jenna stepped beside me. "Want to walk through one last time?" I shook my head. "I'm good." A week later, Rachel texted me. Heard they're in a small rental apartment on the east side. All three crammed in. Brandon's furious. Cheryl's been calling Jared daily, begging to stay with them. Apparently, the inheritance Brandon fought for wasn't an inheritance at all. The condo was in heavy debt. Walter still owed for renovations he'd done years ago, thinking the value would rise. It hadn't. The only thing Brandon won in his family power struggle was liability. Rachel added, "Jared offered to cover a few months of their rent if they promised never to ask to move in. They declined. Out of pride, I guess. Good. Let them have their pride. Let them carry the weight of their choices like I carried the mortgage on that house. Alone, unappreciated, invisible. Except now I wasn't invisible anymore." I moved back in with my mom temporarily. She was surprised at first, worried even. But the moment I walked through her door, she exhaled with relief. "I never liked how he talked to you," she admitted. "You kept saying it was fine, but I could see it." "I know," I said. "I think I wanted it to be fine so badly, I stopped noticing when it wasn't." We made tea. We rearranged her living room. We talked into the night. And for the first time in years, I felt like I was home. Brandon tried to call me twice. I didn't answer. He left one voicemail. "Aurora, please. I made mistakes, I know that. But we can fix this. We can buy another place. I'll talk to my parents. Just, please don't shut me out." But he didn't say, "I'm sorry." Not once. I deleted the message. The buyers moved in 2 weeks later. A young couple, newly married. I left them a note on the kitchen counter with the keys. "This house is full of noise and memory and lessons. Treat each other with respect. Don't ignore red flags. And for heaven's sake, don't give your parents a key." I smiled as I closed the door behind me. The weight of 3 years lifted from my chest. I hadn't just left a house. I'd left a trap. And I'd made sure the ones who set it were the ones left inside when the walls came down.